Don't worry, if any Sontarans come and attack during this video, I am prepared.
Please tell me you're not about to engage Sontarans in battle.
Mrs. Sequel to you.
I accept your offer of a massacre.
Hi, I'm Phil. Welcome to my channel where I like to talk about all the geeky pop culture that I like and consume. Things like Doctor Who and other stuff. But mostly Doctor Who. And we're doing weekly reviews here on the channel of brand new episodes. This one is slightly later than I like to get them out on a Sunday night, but I was in London all day yesterday, at the British Film Institute, the BFI, watching another Doctor Who, Galaxy 4, and did not get home in time for the episode. And so, although I watched it when I got home last night, it was far too late to record a review, so it's a little late. I'm sorry. Probably means I've got like half the views that I usually get. But that's life. We are, of course, talking about War of the Sontarans, the second episode of Doctor Who Flux. And boy, what an episode. Where shall I start with this one? The opening, I thought, was fantastic. It was surreal. Bizarre, just what I like. I love that kind of thing. That opening, especially the black and white bit, was very David Lynch-esque, who is a film director, if you don't know, who made films like Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet, Elephant Man, amongst others, and also the TV series Twin Peaks. Very bizarre director who does bizarre stuff, and I love that kind of thing. So that opening felt very much like that black and white sequence, the crooked house, the desiccated forest of some kind. It looks very intriguing, and my brain is already racking with theories of what that house could be. Maybe I'll make a separate video on that. After last week's cliffhanger, I was slightly worried about how they were going to get out of the situation, or the immediate situation that we were left in on the cliffhanger, that there would be a quick reset. And I wanted them to have to do something to get out of it, and they didn't. But at least it wasn't just hit a button and we dematerialized and rematerialized somewhere else. Something has happened. We don't entirely know what it is, and we didn't get the answers to that. Did the flux take them there? Did they manage to get into behind the Lampari's barrier, but somehow got knocked and sent back in time? I'm not entirely sure. I don't think that was made very clear. Maybe it doesn't need to be. But I wasn't as disappointed with how quickly they got out of that cliffhanger as I thought I might be. Finding themselves in the Crimean War, the group quickly meet Mary Seacole and discover that actually something has gone very wrong with time, because in the Crimean War, the British were fighting, in the real Crimean War, the British were fighting the Russians, but here they seem to be fighting the Sontarans. And Mary has never heard of Russians. Then very quickly, Dan and Yaz disappear, like literally in front of the Doctor, glow blue and disappear. And I was left thinking, well, why were they there in the first place? Why did they have to be there? Why did they not just get thrown to different times when the flux hit them, or whatever happened to send them to the Crimea? Why did that not just send them to the places they were going to be for this episode? Because I like the idea of them getting split up. That's a good idea, but it felt like weird that they were together at the start. I'm guessing that's simply from a narrative exposition reason, so that they know that they are fighting the Sontarans. That's less relevant to where Yaz's storyline goes, but it's very important to where Dan's storyline goes, that he arrives knowing who the Sontarans are, that he recognises them from seeing them on that hill, and that Mary Seacole has explained that they're fighting them. So there's a kind of story narrative reason, in the sense that, like, there's a practical reason why Dan needs to know that, and that's probably why they were there. But within the narrative of the story, it feels a bit like, well, why didn't you just send them there? So I'm in two minds about how I feel about that. We also check in with Vinda, who has been sent to this temple place, and there's this weird floating prism that is talking to him and asking him if he's there to repair something. So that was intriguing. This temple is something we've seen in images, in preview images, in trailers and things, and been wondering about. And so it started to build up the mystery a bit. Now, one thing I said last week was that it skirted the line of having too much packed into it, too many storylines packed into it, and that I hoped that the next several episodes would focus down onto maybe one of those strands in each episode, and I do think they did that this time. This was very much, the bulk of this episode was the Sontaran story, and which was kind of split between Sontarans in Liverpool in the modern day and Sontarans in the Crimean War, and the two aspects, Dan and the Doctor, and then Yaz is going off and doing her own little storyline, which is more related to one of the other strands. But I like the fact that the bulk of this, the middle bit of this, was mostly focused on the Sontarans. That, if they tried to cram in, like Weeping Angels and other stuff this episode as well, I think it would have been too much. Like, it just skirted the line of not being too much last time, but I think if they'd done similar again, it would have been too much. So I like the fact that they have done that. The one, again, slightly out of place element was where Yaz gets to the temple, and the guy that, I forget his name, but the guy that built the tunnels in the 1800s under Liverpool, he's there wandering around the temple, and they have this weird exchange. Now, I can't remember if I said this in my review last week or if it was something I thought of later, but that was the one element last week, that 1800 stuff, that felt a little out of place because nothing really happened in it. We found out this guy was building tunnels and that there might be something more to it than that, because he says, you have no idea why, it would blow your mind, he says to the other guy, if you knew what the purpose of these tunnels were. But nothing happened, and I kind of felt like that needed something like them discovering something at the end, or it didn't need to be much more, but just something a little bit extra just to make those scenes worthwhile. Whereas with the Weeping Angels, last week we had something happen, they sent Claire back in time, and with the Sontarans, that was obviously building up to this episode, and them attacking. There wasn't really anything with that storyline that made me think, oh, I get why that was in there. So I think they should have included something extra last week, and that would have helped this week's scene. I don't think there needed to be anything more. And had they included something last week, I kind of like this thread, this mystery box of what are these tunnels and how is this guy linking into it? Because he's there, he seems to have some awareness of something going wrong, the tunnel's changing, or wherever he thinks he is keeps changing. He acknowledges that Yaz is from a different time to him, and then mutters something about, I can't remember the exact line, but it's something like, oh, this is really worrying, and then wanders off again. And I'm left intrigued about what's going on there, but I just think it needed something else last week to really make us more invested in that bit of the story. On the Crimean side of things, let's talk about the Sontarans. I really like the Sontarans in this story. The design, let's talk about the design, because I briefly mentioned that last time, that they were a lot better than I had thought they would be from the stills. I was a bit concerned about the face from the stills we had got, and how well facial expressions would translate and move, and how much facial movement they would have. But actually, it works really well, and I think this whereas before I was saying I really like the uniform they're wearing, but not so much the face, now I'm coming around to it. I really like the look of these new Sontarans. There is a bit of comedy still with them, especially with Dan Starkey's character, who I can't help every time he talks just thinking of Strax, and he delivers some lines in a way that I would imagine Strax would deliver them. This is him playing the prisoner that's captured and being attended to in the hospital by Mary. And I don't know, the comedy there, it again skirted a line of being there were a couple of lines which I thought that's being said like it was Strax, and I love Strax and I love the comedy of Strax, but that's a very unique Sontaran, and I kind of imagine most Sontarans aren't like Strax. And so hearing him do those kind of comedy lines like that kind of took me out of the moment a little bit, because most of the scenes with the Sontarans are played very seriously, and even the lines that are meant to be funny, like the general saying, "and I wanted to ride a horse," which I loved, he he delivers that in a very earnest way. It's funny because it's bizarre, but the way he delivers it isn't like over the top in this sort of way that Strax is, if that makes sense. So hearing the prisoner do some of those slightly more comedic line deliveries kind of took me out of it for a moment, but some of them also worked. I liked some of them. I'm a bit unsure about that particular Sontaran, but overall, I love the portrayal of the Sontarans in this episode. I thought they were a real menacing force, and yeah, I like them. Mary C. Cole was portrayed very well by the actor. She did a really good job. She was, engaging, watchable. I enjoyed watching her, but I didn't feel like the character got much development. Like, compared to other historical figures we've had in this era, like Rosa Parks or Nikola Tesla, they felt like, because they had to fit in the overall story stuff at either end from the Flux stuff, that there wasn't time for her to do anything other than give us an idea of who the character is, much more than setting up the basic premise of who she is. She is someone who went there of her own. We learned that I didn't know much about her beforehand. I don't think I'd ever heard of her beforehand. So I did learn some things, and I learned that she is someone that went to the front of her own accord to help people. But beyond that, I didn't get much of a feel for her, which is a shame, and absolutely not the actress's fault here. It's not even the writer's fault. It's how much stuff they need to cram into this storyline. If this had just been a standalone Sontaran episode, I feel we would have got more from her, and also probably more from the British general guy as well, that would have fleshed out their characters a bit more. But it almost kind of doesn't matter in this storyline. It would have been nice. That's kind of like, it would have been nice to have, but it was okay not having it. I loved Dan in Liverpool. He was great. His parents were great. When he got the wok, that was great. He delivered so many funny lines here in this. Like when he communicates with the Doctor later on when they're both on Sontaran ships and she's using her sonic to access his phone. Just the way he delivers, like, what, even the photos? I'm not going to try a Liverpool accent. But that line was great. He's got so many good deliveries here that don't feel over the top. Maybe possibly the one about, and it still made me laugh, the one about I was just trying to find my way to, and then he says a pub name. And he does that twice. And it's great, and I love it. Maybe that felt a bit not realistic, but it was still great, and I still liked it. The Doctor herself, I think, really stood out in this episode. There was still the odd occasional moment of over-exposition in some places, but there were also some really great moments of her just standing up to people, especially that British general guy. She makes some great remarks to him about, the smell of rum. I can tell you're working for the smell of rum, and things like that. Just little comments that make really nice jibes against people that kind of make them stop and go, oh, okay. Yeah, I thought she was a really great job here, and probably in terms of the Doctor, this was a better episode than last episode. Especially, in fact, there was that moment where she's standing off against the Sontaran general in the mist, which was a beautiful image anyway. This, I'll talk a bit more about the just look of the show in a minute, but that particular shot with them both standing off at opposite ends of the screen in the mist was beautifully framed, and the acting from both the Sontaran and Jodie there was fantastic. So that was probably what, if I had to pick a Doctor scene from this episode that was one of my favourites, that standoff, that parley scene was probably it. Visually, this episode looks pretty stunning for most of it. There are some great scenes of the Sontaran ships, especially when they're being blown up in both time periods. Of explosions and crashing that look fantastic. The one moment that took me out of it, where I was like, okay, that looks a bit iffy, was when Carvanista and Dan eject from the Sontaran ship. They're crashing into somebody, and it was almost comical the way these two little dots come out of the ship and just plop down into the water. It looked it didn't quite fit in with the look of the rest of the scene. So that kind of threw me out of it a little bit. But beyond that, everything looked fantastic in this episode. Right at the end in the temple, where we're left with so many questions about who these hologram things, the Morai, that somehow time flows through them and they control time in this universe or something like that. And if that's the case, how did the Time Lords not know about them? What are they? Are they beyond the Time Lords? Is this something to do with the Doctor's original race or the Timeless Child's race, if the Timeless Child ends up not being the Doctor? What are these people? There's so many questions about this temple. But Yaz is there with Vinda. They get to meet for the first time. And Vinda is, again, kind of there. That doesn't have much to do in this episode. We get a little kind of glimpse at his personality, but beyond that, we don't really learn much more. And Yaz is there taking charge. She's got on her hand written WWTDD. What would the Doctor do? On her hand. And so there's a moment where that hovering thing comes and talks to her and says, "Are you here to repair?" And she looks at her hand and goes, "Yeah, I am." And I do wonder if they're going down a route similar to Clara here, where she's trying to take on the Doctor role a bit too much, and it's gonna, backfire on her. Arguably, it backfires on her in this episode, because Swarm and Azure turn up with Passenger, this other big brute of a guy, who and somehow installs both her and Vinda as replacements for two of these Morai. And they're kind of stuck on these plinths when the Doctor turns up. Doctor and Dan turn up after defeating the Sontarans. In terms of how... I should probably conclude... I like how they defeat the Sontarans, because the Doctor goes in and basically convinces them to retreat. Although, being Sontarans, they would never call it retreat. It's a tactical withdrawal. But she convinces them. But then the British guy has set explosives and blows them all up and kills them. And there's another line, "They were retreating." There's lots of callbacks to the Russell T Davies era, I'm noticing this series. We had a few last week. This one seems to be a callback to when the Prime Minister in the Harriet blew up the Sycorax ship that was going away, and she blew it up, got Torchwood to blow it up for her. So there's parallels to it there. It's very similar to that, and the line delivery of "they were retreating" was very similar as well. But that was an interesting moment. But after that, they managed to get back into the TARDIS. Because I forgot, another great scene is where the Doctor is trying to get back into the TARDIS right near the beginning of the episode. She goes up to the TARDIS and the camera follows her, going all around the TARDIS looking for the door, around all four sides, and there's not a door there. Great shot, great concept, because I don't think that Doctor Who has done before. And yeah, I really enjoyed that shot as well. But anyway, they get back to they end up in her, and she goes and gets Dan, who has had this obviously scene. He gets rescued by the dog, by the way. Forgot to mention that. Good to see Carvanista again. Him getting rescued by his dog. Nice. His dog person. And anyway, she goes and picks up Dan, and they end up in this temple where Yaz and Vinda are, and confront Azure and Swarm, who just exude this both charisma, especially Swarm, and menace. And I'm really liking the portrayal of these two. I liked Swarm from the off last week. I was a bit unsure about Azure and her characterization, but I think it's much stronger in this episode than it was last week. And I can't remember if I said this last week, but Swarm kind of has a Paul Bettany vibe to his voice. Vision from the MCU. It kind of sounds a bit like that. And I just really like him. Like I said, he's captivating. He's menacing. There's a whole mystery about him that we don't even know what he wants yet. And I love it. I love this mystery. I love this plot thread. And I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the episode. Sorry they're a bit later than usual. What did you think of this episode? Did you like it? Was there anything that you weren't too keen on? Highlights for me were the Doctor versus the Sontarans, literally the face-off between the two of them. Dan with his wok and his funny lines, and his parents. I loved his parents. And just generally the mystery of Swarm and what his plan is. I'm looking forward to finding out all of that. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you next week for another review, hopefully on Sunday next week. See you then.